What if the Anunnaki gods were never the original builders of existence at all, but instead the consequence of a conflict far older than memory itself, constructing everything we know from what had been left behind? How did the Anunnaki gods actually bring the fabric of our reality into being? Think about the real meaning of that for a moment. The gods that ancient civilizations prayed to, built temples for, and organized their entire lives around, may have themselves been standing on the shoulders of something even older and even more powerful. Stay with us as we move through some of the deepest layers of Mesopotamian mythology, searching for fragments of a forgotten cosmos, one which existed long before the first ziggurats ever reached up into the twilight sky. This sweeping story brings to light the hidden history of the ancient Anunnaki Titans, the primeval forces who once held dominion over a universe of motionless and infinitely dark waters. It was a secret which gradually slipped away from human memory, seldom spoken aloud by the generations that followed. Yet it remained a foundational truth that quietly shaped everything those people left behind. You can find its traces carved directly into the walls of their grandest monuments, embedded within the base 60 system of their earliest star charts, and pressed into the cuneiform etchings of their most sacred clay records. What is striking about that is how deliberately it was preserved. These were not casual references. The people who recorded this information went out of their way to make sure it survived, embedding it into the very structures and systems that defined their civilization. Long before the first scribes ever set down the deeds of mortal kings, these primordial gods held complete dominion over the unformed elements of creation. Their dramatic overthrow and ultimate betrayal lie at the very core of the Enuma Elish, a story that reaches all the way back to the earliest dawn of time. Our journey begins inside the ancient Babylonian creation myth, our awareness gently descending into a tranquil and lightless past, where the very first lords still slumbered. This mysterious text introduces us to the seized gods of Mesopotamian lore, a gathering of fallen creators, known in sacred tongues as the Ilanu Kamutu. Ancient priests used this official term to describe a captive and inactive generation of their very first primordial masters. Once the supreme rulers of nature, many of these formidable titans were eventually defeated, stripped of their radiance, and hurled down into the hollow depths of the underworld, while others simply dissolved quietly from memory. There is something quietly haunting about that image. These were not minor figures. They were the original rulers of existence itself, and yet they were cast down, forgotten, and replaced. What remains of them now exists, not as memory, but as the ground beneath our feet. They exist now only as subterranean ghosts, serving as the silent rocky foundations that bear the heavy weight of the conscious world from below. Their eternal patience forms the absolute bedrock of reality, allowing the surface world to rest safely above their dormant forms. To truly understand how this cosmic sovereignty passed from such powerful titans, we have to trace their forgotten origins through the ancient records that still carry their lineage. A well-known cuneiform god list, called Anum, follows this obscure ancestry across its weathered clay surface. It records the names of over 20 distinct generations of cosmic parents who existed in the shadows long before the light of the first dawn. Later scribes made it explicitly clear that these dormant figures were the direct ancestors of the more familiar Anunnaki pantheon yet to come. Recording these honored names was a deeply sacred duty, a way of honoring the earliest craftsmen of a vast cosmic structure. Each generation represented a slow settling of universal elements as raw potential began to softly converge in the deep. This unbroken chain of primeval lineage stretched backward into an unfathomable depth of history, where all familiar shapes dissolve into pure energy. A profound sense of stillness filled this initial dawn, completely defying our ordinary understanding of time. It was a tranquil universe, existing entirely without predictable cycles or shifting seasons, lacking any particular patterns to mark the passing years. There were no disruptive thoughts or sudden movements to disturb the absolute stillness that blanketed this boundless aquatic void. An absolute quiet settled across the infinite primordial waters, creating a perfectly still ocean of endless possibility. The unformed cosmos rested in a state of deep harmony, where every element remained locked in a gentle embrace. Without the warmth of a sun or the pull of a moon, those earliest eons drifted peacefully within a completely static void. It is worth pausing here to really let that sink in. This was not emptiness in the way we usually think of it. It was a kind of fullness, a deep and patient waiting, as though the universe itself knew that something extraordinary was about to begin. Among the specific names carved into this ancestral list lies the fascinating story of Duri, alongside his counterpart Dari. Their ancient names translate directly to the eternal and the everlasting, representing time in its most elemental state. They ruled over this peaceful reality, long before younger deities ever established the predictable cycles of slowly wandering stars or shifting atmospheric weather. These ultimate embodiments of time did not advance with a steady rhythm, but instead lingered like a deep reservoir of perfectly motionless liquid. Their reign was defined by an unbroken flow where past eras were completely indistinguishable from the next. It was an age of pure endurance, where the fundamental laws of existence were slowly steeping in the darkness. Alongside them stood the foundational deities known as Alala and Bilala, who served as the very first personifications of sound itself. They represented the distant hum of a vibrating universe that echoed softly throughout the black expanse. Their presence was not a spoken language, but rather the raw echoing resonance of the early earth slowly taking shape in the depths. That detail is quietly profound. Before light, before form, before any recognizable shape existed in the cosmos, there was sound, a hum, a resonance, as though the universe was breathing before it was born. This cosmic vibration moved through the ocean like a slow heartbeat pulsing within the chest of a sleeping giant. It offered the very first sensation of movement within the stagnant void, a gentle signal that the universe was beginning to stir. The soothing resonance of their combined voices settled into one perfect tone, forming a baseline for the complex melodies of life that would eventually follow. These original forces of the earliest creation stories would ultimately serve as the absolute foundations for all later Anunnaki gods to inherit, their silent presence providing the vital materials required for forming the very earth itself. By slowly surrendering their active roles, many of these titans would ultimately come to form the hidden structural framework that safely cradles the fragile surface of our reality. Their dormant forms supplied the heavy bedrock upon which the first sprawling cities of humanity would later be raised. This profound sacrifice transformed the swirling chaos of emptiness into a stable anchoring point for the next great phase of creation to unfold. Before we begin our journey tonight, take a deep breath, settle into the stillness. If your eyes are getting heavy, let them close. If the room is dark, let the shadows be a comfort. This space is built for pauses, for the slow unspooling of time, a quiet harbor where the present moment gently dissolves. But before the history takes over, I want to ask you something simple. Feel the quiet, look into the dark, and tell me in the comments below, what city are you in right now, and what hour is it? Whenever I read through your responses, it feels like we are building a quiet, invisible bridge across the globe. There is something profoundly beautiful about the fact that right now, in this exact breath, someone in Tokyo is watching the very first light of morning hit the glass, just as someone in a rainy corner of Ireland is letting go of a long day at midnight, all while someone in a quiet house in Texas is listening to these exact same words, just looking for a little bit of peace. All of us living in completely different moments of our lives, yet sharing in the exact same silence. If you find a sanctuary here in these late-night wanderings through the past, please consider subscribing. It helps our quiet community grow, and it ensures you'll always have a soft place to land whenever it is time to rest. Leave your comment, tell me your city and your hour, because in a way, that is exactly what history is. It is the story of human beings, standing in their own fleeting moments of time, looking into the darkness and leaving a trail of clues for the rest of us to discover. Tonight, we follow one of those trails, let the light of the day fade away as we step backward together to explore the mysteries of our past. Before any towering mountains could rise from the dark soil, our vast universe was simply a boundless ocean of absolute darkness. Sumerian mythology speaks of an infinite expanse known to ancient priests as Nahmu. She was revered as an original mother of all things, resting quietly as a fertile source of potential life. Ancient scholars did not view this primeval sea as a monster to be feared or conquered. They understood her as a peaceful point of origin before physical matter ever took its final shape. This silent womb provided a nurturing environment for a reality that was still waiting to be born. Later Babylonian traditions would personify this aquatic embodiment as a brilliant blending of two distinct waters. They named the great mother of the salty seas, Tiamat, pairing her alongside a sweet companion of fresh water known as Apsu. These legends describe Tiamat as an endless expanse of heavy ocean currents heaving softly in the dark. Her massive form existed in perfect balance beside the cool abyss of fresh water. Ancient texts suggest that their combined presence filled the empty void with a deeply comforting silence. It was a beautifully dormant era that stretched across countless millenniums of forgotten memory without a single interruption. There is something deeply compelling about that image. Two vast bodies of water, one salt and one fresh, simply existing beside each other in perfect stillness. No conflict, no ambition, just a quiet and patient universe holding its breath before the first great story began. An entire cosmos floated lazily within a serene suspension of water, far removed from any chaotic friction of later eras. A profound sense of tranquility saturated every single drop of this endless sea. There were still no harsh winds to whip the surface into a violent storm. Those waters remained as smooth as polished obsidian glass, reflecting nothing but an absolute emptiness. Floating within this liquid sanctuary, the earliest elements of existence drifted together in complete harmony. Eventually, a slow shift of cosmic proportions began within that dark eternity. Those heavy oceans of salt started to mingle with the fresh springs of the underground, stirring a gentle churning which created the very first tangible material in a completely lightless reality. Their subtle movements caused tiny particles to slowly drift together across vast distances. A rhythmic pulling of ancient tides gathered loose elements into soft clusters of mud. Solid matter was finally beginning to coalesce within the peaceful embrace of the earliest oceans. The heavy scent of wet minerals began to permeate our unformed universe. Swirling currents guided this newborn soil into gentle patterns. Slowly, a firm foundation was being woven together from the absolute emptiness of that ancient abyss. According to the legendary Enuma Elish, this mixing of distinct waters gave birth to early entities of soil. Ancient scribes called these original offsprings by the names of Nahmu and his sister Nahmu. They represented the very first sediment settling out of those primordial waters, slowly separating to form our world directly from its churning body. Esoteric tablets of clay describe these two figures as massive giants floating quietly through the deep, the very physical manifestations of heavy silt drifting lazily in an insulated environment. Their colossal forms provided a necessary anchor for the elements of life gathering around them. Think about what that means for a moment. The very first beings to emerge from creation were not gods of thunder or fire. They were beings of mud and silt, patient and grounding, whose entire purpose was simply to hold things together. There is a quiet wisdom in that, one which the ancient world seemed to understand far better than we do. These silent guardians asked for nothing but to rest eternally in this dark embrace. They lacked any restless ambition to conquer or organize a sprawling cosmos. Their singular purpose was simply to exist as a grounding weight for the floating debris of early creation. Over unfathomable stretches of time, this floating sediment naturally began to accumulate. Countless layers of soft mud packed tightly together under a heavy pressure of water. This dense material slowly hardened to form the initial crust of our early planet. Those drifting giants essentially morphed into the massive shelves which form our continents. Future life would eventually find a safe place of rest upon their broad shoulders. It was a completely organic process of slow evolution within the ether. It is natural to appreciate the unhurried state which prevailed during this new dawn of creation. The early Earth remained a quiet expanse of mud, resting peacefully inside a cosmic ocean, creating a serene environment that was totally undisturbed. Every passing era laid another thick layer of heavy soil upon the expanding floors of the sea. The gentle lapping of primordial waves smoothed the rough edges of these new continents. A beautifully structured planet was slowly coming to life beneath cool waves. Nature was allowed to mature at its own deeply meditative pace, taking millions of years to compact into solid rock and stone. A slow accumulation that guaranteed a stable underlying foundation for the towering empires yet to arrive. No harsh sunlight penetrated those calming depths to dry the wet silt. A profound sensation of absolute security wrapped around these hardening geological formations. All the while, those sleeping giants of silt simply floated in a state of suspended animation. What is quietly remarkable about all of this is that the ancient Sumerians were essentially describing geology. Long before modern science had any language for it, these stories were encoding a real understanding of how the earth beneath us actually formed, layer by patient layer. Their inherently passive nature allowed them to quietly fade into the background. It was a peaceful retreat that transformed their enormous bodies into the literal bedrock of the earth beneath our feet, and the embankments supporting sweet channels of fresh water which have nourished our planet all these many years. As soft clay slowly solidified into vast plains of unbroken ground, every passing epoch added another layer of heavy sediments. A silent architecture was building itself without any urgent need for immediate completion. Those silent giants would come to fade permanently into the dark soil, to act as the unseen cornerstone of all material reality. Their quiet resignation meant that the future world would never be torn by their chaotic movements. A profound sense of enduring stability was forever woven into that basic fabric of our early Earth. By settling into an inactive slumber, they provided the essential support for an ever-changing cosmos. Those vast plains of mud were now entirely prepared to support a magnificent burst of terrestrial growth. The silent landscape rested patiently, while subtle pressures continued to build deeply within its heavy layers of packed earth. An immense shift was finally ready to push the first towering structures of the cosmos upward into existence. A heaviness began to stir across this crust of recent formation. Sumerian mythology tells of a massive mountain rising slowly from those boundless depths. This breathtaking formation of stone broke through the glassy surface with extreme caution, bringing the physical presence of solid mass to the aquatic horizon. Here it is said that the primordial mother self procreated to bring forth a sky god of immense beauty named An, her actions echoing throughout time. This towering father of heaven emerged perfectly paired with an earth goddess of heavy density, known as Ki. Both of these monumental forces were brought into reality, completely fused together in this tremendous mound, which rose from the ocean floors. This magnificent union was referred to collectively as Enki, the great cosmic mountain. It stood as a solitary mountain of immense scale, stretching from the deepest river valleys up to the highest reaches of the atmosphere all at once. An was securely locked together with Ki in a permanent embrace. This static posture held them tightly against one another and left absolutely no space in which to move. It created a suffocating weight that pressed heavily down upon those layers of fertile silt. Life could not physically bloom within such a space of incredible tightness. There was absolutely no breathable gap between the heavy mass below and the stars of distant galaxies above. The sky remained entirely indistinguishable from its terrestrial counterpart. They pressed together in a constant building intensity that demanded release, a timeless union that prevented any sort of natural growth from taking root. Unable to take a single breath, everything remained frozen within this monolith of heavy stone, awaiting liberation. It is a rather striking concept. Here were two of the most powerful forces in all of creation, and yet it was their very closeness that caused such confliction. Not the kind of conflict that stalled the universe, but an embrace so total that at first nothing else could exist within it. While tensions slowly mounted, these ancient pairs observed the shifting reality around them with grace. They recognized the growing obsolescence of passivity as the cosmic structure of a new design began to clearly establish dominance. Unlike the violent titans of other domains who would eventually rebel against the later courts of supreme authority, these early entities chose a different path. They would not fight against younger gods for control of a developing universe. Much like those ancient silt giants who slowly settled to form the Earth's crust, they voluntarily stepped out of sight, retreating to the farthest reaches of the heavens, or deep beneath the ground below. These ancestors of forgotten lore would become respectfully known as the slumbering lords, surrendering as they entered eternal rest. They chose to retreat quietly into the shadows, their peaceful journey honoring the intricate and intelligent geometry of unfolding time and space. But long before they would fade into the recesses of memory, the pressure between the sky and earth was growing increasingly unbearable by each passing eon, under the strain of the cosmic mountain. The unbridled energies which now hummed throughout the universe possessed a new desire of deep longing to finally expand outward. The earth goddess herself possessed seeds of countless varieties that simply could not sprout without the atmosphere of open skies. Her boundless fertility was tightly caged within a solid tomb of compressed minerals. Unborn forces within longed to express the vitality of green hues she held so protectively, and carry those vibrant colors across plains of endless reach. Yet this paradise of potential growth was still entirely suffocated by the incredible mass pressing down from the sky above. Imagine the suspense. An entire world of color, of life and growth, locked inside a body of stone, waiting for a single breath of open air. Such tensions were rapidly reaching a breaking point of critical severity. Every molecule of existence vibrated, eager for release. A staggering separation was about to tear this world of ancient origins wide open. For that seemingly endless embrace connecting An to Ki could not last forever. Much like the ever-shifting currents of the silent seas, the absolute stillness of this ancient time was destined to give way to the rhythms of change. To contemplate this forgotten law is to get a small glimpse of the magnificent birth pangs of our living world, as interpreted by the earliest stargazers. They left behind a beautiful meditation on the transition from stagnant potential into a living, breathing reality. The ancients weren't just telling a story. They were mapping out the profound realization that before the architecture of the earth could flourish, the universe had to endure a sacred separation. To unleash the vibrance of life within, this mesmerizing narrative places us at the very precipice of a new era, where existence itself holds its breath. Every hidden layer of the compressed stone seemed to swell with heavy expectation, waiting for a catalyst to redefine the dawn. A profound transformation was taking shape in the quiet, concentrating all its ancient weight into a single moment which forever changed the fate of the world. Powerful forces of an invisible presence began to gather deeply within a space of narrow margins. A quiet murmuring reverberated through those solid walls to signal an awakening of great magnitude. It was the sound of faint echoes hinting at an impending change. The cosmic mountain of Enki began to tremble under its own suffocating gravity, causing thick fractures to spread slowly across its rigid, towering form, deepening rapidly. The smallest of these first cracks offered a glimpse of freedom from the crushing weight. The universe was preparing to permanently alter its own essence. Such a transformation of magnificent scale would require a burst of incredible force, carrying the power of raw energy itself. It would demand a presence strong enough to pry apart those titans of early creation. A bright new entity waited patiently to breathe life into the desolate and barren soil, knowing Ki held the potential of vast fertility closely within her core. Even the primeval waters of Nahmu seemed to sense the coming rupture, shifting in anticipation. She watched as her children struggled against their own bonds. Even one of the oldest forces in all of creation, the primordial ocean herself, recognized that something had to give. There are moments in these ancient stories where you can feel the entire universe leaning forward, as though existence itself was holding its breath. And perhaps it was. These final moments held a precarious silence, one which hung heavily over the ancient landscape. It was a quiet of deafening intensity that preceded a roar of unimaginable volume, signaling a new beginning which would give way to the world we now know. Every grain of densely compacted silt braced itself for an impact of monumental force, sensing a new shape slowly forming deep within its core. This spark carried a dynamic power of ferocious strength, born of the raw forces of an untamed wilderness waiting to be unleashed. This rift of atmospheric friction was slowly gathering strength inside its prison of breathless voids, preparing to erupt. A profound awakening was finally set into motion. The suffocating pressure holding the sky to earth, had reached the furthest limit of its endurance. Something entirely new was quietly taking shape in that incredibly narrow margin between them. The timeless union of these two massive entities would produce one of the most exalted and oldest figures of the more well-known hierarchy of Anunnaki gods, who would later come to rule the earth. After all, the term Anunnaki literally translates to offspring of An, or those of princely seed. But he was the clearing breeze that finally awakened the very essence of life from its long slumber. Such tremendous tension had forged a mighty entity of the very first storms and atmospheric winds to sweep across the primordial landscape. Ancient texts introduce this dynamic force of raw nature as the great air god Enlil. He was born directly inside the suffocatingly tight space separating his locked parents. It was a necessary phase in our cosmic evolution, which required a powerful catalyst to tear its inflexible elements apart. With a sudden and explosive burst of energy, this young storm god took his very first breath. His deep inhalation manifested as a terrifying primeval wind of unmatched ferocity. Sumerian scholars would later give a name to this raging force, the Imhul wind. It tore through that airless prison with a deafening roar and pure unrelenting power. Rushing currents forced themselves aggressively into those tiny fractures, deepening them. The sheer physical strength and gravity of this sweeping storm pushed relentlessly against the walls of their boundaries. It forcefully drove the sky god An upward into an infinite dark expanse, while simultaneously pressing the earth goddess Ki downward, driving apart their eternal embrace to make way for a grand new expansion. Vast empty space was finally established by way of this single momentous act, separating our terrestrial Earth from the glowing stars above. The opening expanse created a breathable environment where organic life could eventually exist, laying the crucial groundwork for all future biological development. And this part of the lore is particularly profound, because the separation of An and Ki wasn't just a random clashing of chaotic particles. It was the ultimate birth of space itself that allowed reality to truly expand. This moment signifies the transition from a world of pacified silence to a universe of unbridled potential. Just think about the immense implications hidden within these cuneiform records. By pushing the heavens away, Enlil didn't just create a breathable atmosphere, he established the very concept of the horizon itself, giving future mortal minds a vast, starry canvas to look up at in quiet wonder. It serves as a universal reminder that every breath of open air we take could be the direct inheritance of a sacred primordial compromise that forever changed the architecture of the night. Yet this monumental event carried a tragic consequence for the displaced father of the heavens. Pushed to the absolute furthest reaches of our universe, he stepped completely out of that physical middle realm where humanity would someday dwell. And though he would remain the undeniable king of the gods for eons to come, he would become incredibly distant and isolated, serving as a silent guardian of the star-speckled sky. His majestic presence faded into a silent and abstract memory, far removed from everyday terrestrial affairs. An became a retired figure of Sumerian mythology, watching passively from beyond those fixed stars, while his celestial form drifted away into quiet solitude. The earth goddess experienced a magnificent transformation. Ki underwent a remarkable metamorphosis from a crushed static mound of soil into a fertile and living canvas. Her previously hardened form softened wonderfully under the refreshing breezes and gentle rain, her tangled hair sprouting effortlessly into the first marshy grasses blowing gently in the wind. Her internal veins of stone opened wide to become hidden underground aquifers, and sweet freshwater springs flowing directly up from the depths of Apsu. These flowing subterranean waters were now perfectly primed to be cultivated by natural forces. Her newly awakened body offered a fertile vessel for the preceding ages of terrestrial growth. The howling Imhul wind eventually settled into a steady rhythmic breeze across her surface. Our unformed world was finally separated into distinct and manageable domains of open sky and soil. However, even with this vital separation complete, the raw, muddy surface remained entirely wild. But it would not last long. Gripped with the sorrow of their parting, An drifted alone through his vast domain of empty space, weeping at the loss of his beloved earth goddess. His divine tears fell downward to splash into the tranquil waters. From this quiet mingling of celestial grief with the primeval sea, an incredibly wise water god named Enki was finally born. He did not emerge into existence at exactly that same time as his older brother, but rather he arrived shortly after those heavens were torn away. This brilliant new deity inherited an immense intellect from his father, and possessed a deep affinity for those subterranean waters of his mother. These new gods desired a highly organized place for living things, and to establish a firmer foundation where towering temples could someday stand securely. It is in this exact wish that the lore tells of a massive feat of geoengineering. For the earliest scribes did not merely envision this sweeping change as a purely natural force of evolution. Instead, they described the careful attention the gods put into shaping our early Earth. To achieve this ambitious goal, water god's son, Marduk, constructed a massive woven reed raft and cast it adrift to float lazily upon the endless primeval waters of the southern Gulf. It served as a brilliant structural base for a monumental task of earthly cultivation. He began to scoop up loose dirt and mud from surrounding murky depths, pouring heavy wet soil directly over the floating framework of tightly bound reeds. Layer after layer of dense river silt accumulated upon the drifting foundation. A solid island was slowly formed from the center of a dark marshy void. His divine hands packed the loose dirt down tightly to ensure a completely secure and firm surface. The sheer pressure of this meticulous packing forced excess moisture out of the newly created landmass. The deity then carefully carved deep winding pathways to drain any remaining water away. These beautifully sprawling aquatic veins would eventually become the mighty Tigris and the sweeping Euphrates rivers. These winding pathways of fresh water represent the literal lifeblood of civilization, flowing smoothly to sustain both the fields of humanity and the sanctuaries of the gods. Their continuous flow carried sweet fresh water through the heart of our developing plains. Our world was finally gifted with its very first stable ground in a magnificent act of divine engineering that conquered the chaotic uncertainty which prevailed before. The early scribes weren't merely describing the physical origins of the soil, but rather the elegant introduction of design, purpose, and conscious intelligence into a blank void. The raw physical environment was now perfectly shaped to host a flourishing civilization. Yet this freshly molded landscape was still waiting for a deeper structural purpose and design to guide its future. A stable platform of packed earth required something more than just dry dirt to thrive. The raw physics of our universe needed to be governed by unbending cosmic laws. Before the younger, vibrant deities could build their sweeping cities, these guiding rules of reality had to be obtained from an inherent intelligence contained within the ether. Our newly terraformed earth rested patiently beneath an open sky. Vast muddy plains waited in absolute silence for a deeper purpose to guide their future. The raw forces of our universe needed to be governed, for without an orderly system, the untamed world would simply collapse back into chaos. These sacred blueprints of civilization were known to ancient scribes as the Holy May. They dictated every single mathematical equation required for further progress, containing a pure geometry needed to measure endless fields of golden grain and track drifting luminous bodies across the heavenly tapestry. Without this divine instruction, early humanity would never learn to trace the pathways of the wandering stars, to determine the shifting seasons, or understand the intricate system of authority needed to guide a blooming civilization, remaining completely lost. An organized society depended entirely upon these carefully guarded rules. Every sweeping canal required a precise design to flow correctly, hidden guidelines that were absolutely essential for maintaining the natural order. Containing the flawless rules for mathematics, alongside every delicate process of natural harmony, these profound laws would eventually dictate a peaceful rhythm across all mortal life. But the younger, vibrant deities possessed absolutely no access to this vital wisdom, leading to a growing impatience. Before any towering temples could be built upon those flat green valleys, these rules had to be acquired, because all the while this magnificent knowledge still remained tightly clenched in the grip of the older primeval titans, who continued to rule our terrestrial realm through the darkest of times. They governed with a strict hand. Sumerian legends speak of a fierce titan whose powerful reign permeated this era. His name was Enmesharra. He stood as a magnificent sovereign who held absolute, unquestioned dominion over the Holy May. This formidable lord commanded every inch of muddy surface stretching across the early plains, projecting a terrifying authority. His massive presence cast a dark shadow over the land. A heavy atmosphere surrounded his every movement. Enmesharra possessed a deeply terrifying radiance which commanded total submission. His booming voice echoed like distant thunder rolling through an empty canyon. Materialized from the very fabric of reality, this ancient ruler governed the earthly world with an iron fist. He projected a towering aura across the silent world, and did not tolerate even the faintest hint of defiance. His massive form seemed to be carved directly from the thick stone of a primordial mountain, a dark and luminous energy pulsing slowly beneath his hard exterior. He was an incredibly formidable figure who inspired deep fear across the silent void. Yet his true throne remained anchored deep within silent, lightless caverns of the expansive underworld. These hidden roots provided a heavily grounding force for the power he held over the earthly domain, where he alone reigned supreme. Ancient scholars referred to his primary title as Lugal Dukuga, which beautifully translates to the proud lord of the Holy Mound, known as Duku, that original and most sacred mountain of heaven and earth. This primeval cosmic landscape served as an isolated fortress of ancient knowledge. Here the unbending rules of reality were first crystallized within its revered soil. It functioned as a heavily guarded sanctuary, one which was completely inaccessible to the younger generations. This holy mound still rose sharply from flat plains like a jagged tooth of rock. It was a completely isolated fortress, surrounded by miles of barren dirt. Only the oldest generation of deities dared to approach its steep slopes. A heavy, suffocating pressure blanketed the sacred soil of this elevated peak, warning away any curious travelers. Brilliant celestial magic hummed quietly throughout its packed earthen foundations. While this towering sanctuary stood proudly above ground, its deep roots reached far downward, deep beneath the earth's surface. These massive roots connected directly to his dark underworld domain, a heavy anchor for his subterranean power. This deep connection ensured that his shadowy influence permeated every layer of early existence. But a restless ambition began to slowly stir among vibrant new deities of the celestial assembly. Figures such as Enlil, alongside a brave warrior known as Ninurta, gazed down upon the raw potential lying within those divine designs. They watched this ancient titan with an intense jealousy burning in their hearts, finding it entirely unfair for such intelligence to be kept hidden from them. They desperately desired to use those sacred laws to organize the wild lands, wishing to build sweeping cities and towering temples across the green valleys. They envisioned a perfectly ordered world blooming with vibrant new life. This bright vision stood in stark contrast to the dark severity of older titans. Secret hushed meetings were held in distant shaded corners of their newly formed sky. These vibrant gods began to actively scheme in a daring act of rebellion. Thick storm clouds gathered rapidly along the stretching horizon. Their whispered plans signaled an impending end to the long era of unmoving stillness created by the primordial titans. A brilliant new age of divine organization rapidly approached our resting earth. Meanwhile, the older gods were not blind to this growing revolt brewing above them. They felt a shifting of cosmic gears echoing down through solid rock. Some began amassing their own dark forces in response to such arrogant ambition. Deep within his underground stronghold, Enmesharra surrounded himself in the terrifying presence of his 7 demonic sons as he prepared for all-out war between the generations. These shadowy offspring were known to ancient scribes as the fearsome 7 Sabiti demons, who waited restlessly in darkness to defend his absolute control over the earth. A fierce loyalty bound these demonic children tightly to their towering father. They hungered for a chance to crush any rebels who dared to approach. Their unstable energy swirled dangerously within the lightless abyss of the underworld. They represented the raw, unshaped anger of an earth that refused to be tamed, craving a violent clash. These elemental storm demons embodied a raw, chaotic spark of primordial craftsmanship. They represented disease and sheer stark terror, while commanding the ferocious tempests of an unstable sky. Their horrifying shapes shifted constantly within a dark subterranean throne room, refusing to take solid shape while they guarded Enmesharra's throne. Tensions between the ever-growing family of vibrant younger deities and their ancestors quickly reached a boiling point. Invisible shockwaves rippled violently through the world in a rising noise, which disturbed the peaceful slumber of many ancient gods resting deep underground. It sent gentle tremors through solid rock to signal a coming rupture. Our entire universe hovered on an absolute precipice of war. The peaceful stillness of our early Earth was about to be permanently shattered, with deafening roars that would soon echo downward into sweet freshwater depths, igniting a legendary battle. These deafening sounds were not born from a sudden clash of weapons, at least not at first. They began instead as a slow and rhythmic rumble of industry, echoing downward from bustling settlements into the sweet freshwater depths. The world was rapidly filling with the vibrant energy of young deities working tirelessly to shape their damp environment. Descendants of the very silt giants that formed our slowly shifting continents. Lesser gods known to ancient scribes as the Igigi multiplied quickly across green river valleys to expand the celestial design, taking over the heavy task of cultivating the earth. Their relentless reshaping of the land created an agonizing clamor, cutting straight through the heavy silence of their primordial history. This booming noise of early progress carried a deeply disruptive frequency down through thickly packed layers of soil. The endless shouting of this workforce, combined with the growing pantheon of Anunnaki gods, drifted deep into a submerged sanctuary belonging to the sleeping freshwater deity known as Apsu. He was an ancient father of the Primordial Titans, the literal embodiment of the fresh underground aquifers who desired nothing more than absolute stillness for his eternal rest. Instead, the vibrations from above completely deprived him of his peaceful slumber beneath those muddy banks. The echoes of hammering stones bounced constantly across the glassy surface of his quiet domain. Driven entirely mad by the fatigue, this primordial titan sought counsel from his chaotic vizier, named Nahmu. His patience finally shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces under the crushing weight of perpetual exhaustion. He knew he had to do something. Together they formulated a devastating plan to permanently silence the arrogant younger generation, deciding that the undisturbed silence of their earliest days could only be restored by eliminating every ambitious deity working tirelessly above them. A sinister plot to wipe away all blooming life hovered dangerously close on the horizon. Nahmu leaned closely toward his master, whispering dark words of encouragement into the shadows. This only served to fuel the bitter rage that was already burning deeply within his aquatic lord. Apsu listened to this sinister advice with an unsettling satisfaction, allowing such intense fury to completely overtake his normally tranquil spirit. This simmering anger quickly manifested in a very tangible way, causing a peaceful ocean of fresh water to boil with sudden intensity. Heavy currents began to crash aggressively against muddy riverbanks as the enraged deity prepared to unleash a devastating flood upon those unsuspecting gods above. A swelling tide of dark water gathered immense strength within the lightless abyss, threatening to wash away everything in its path. A total reset of the earthly garden seemed absolutely certain as these ancient shadows conspired in the darkness. But the brilliantly clever water god Enki uncovered their dark intentions before they could come to fruition. Also known to Babylonian scholars by his later title of Ea, he recognized that brute physical force would ultimately fail against his primordial ancestor. While the sacred blueprints still remained tightly guarded by older titans, Enki relied entirely upon the internal brilliance from which he had been born. He drew deeply from that immense intellect inherited directly from his celestial father, An. This profound wisdom, combined with the tranquil essence of his aquatic mother, allowed him to forge a unique power completely outside the laws of early creation. Relying upon a highly sophisticated magic of esoteric incantations, this wise deity formulated a far more elegant solution to save our world. He acted swiftly, carefully weaving a masterful spell of pure aquatic resonance to subdue the gathering threat, waiting in the depths. This soothing vibration of celestial logic was cast gently over those deep waters to quiet the roaring tempest. His melodic hum drifted lazily through the submerged caverns to wrap around the angry primeval god. Slowly, a heavy slumber washed across the vast expanse of that freshwater abyss, calming the Titan's very soul and pulling him into an inescapable trance of unreachable depths. While Apsu slept, his brilliant victor chose a peaceful path of resolution. Rather than seeking punishment, Enki refused to harm his ancestor outright, deciding instead to keep him in the endless slumber he so desperately wanted, permanently neutralizing his rage. The ancient god's nourishing soul had been spared, his sweet waters flowing endlessly to the dense surface to fertilize the world above for ages yet to come. The young water god stripped Apsu of his radiant crown to claim that vast and deeply submerged domain as his own personal sanctuary. He proceeded to build his magnificent new palace directly atop those slumbering remains resting below. it would be referred to from there on as Abzu, meaning House of the Abyss. With the former ruler at peace, divine attention quickly turned toward his terrified vizier. Mumu's very essence represented the raw, unshaped spark of primordial craftsmanship that desperately needed to be controlled with a firm hand. Enki captured this chaotic entity by fashioning a magical collar of woven spells tightly around his neck, taking him into his newly claimed abyss to establish a firm celestial boundary for our future. This captivity was viewed not as a harsh punishment, but as a calming redirection of the wild, unfocused energy. Mumu was stripped of his independent will to serve a much higher structural purpose. Locked securely away inside those glowing halls, this once volatile spark became a permanent engine of creative skill, settling quietly into the depths. He was made to passively feed the gentle mechanisms driving the progression of our universe. He now hummed with a steady and predictable pulse that safely regulated the organized cosmos turning slowly above. A beautifully structured reality was finally allowed to flourish. Little did he know this defining moment would come to spark further conflict, leading to far more intense wars yet to spread across the cosmos. For these primordial gods were not the only deities becoming growingly unhappy with the new hierarchy. Enki's masterful subduing of an ancient regime sent a harsh ripple effect throughout the boundless cosmic ocean. Deep within those salty, heaving depths of the outer seas, a powerful goddess was overwhelmed with the sudden loss of her partner. Tiamat began to churn aggressively as she realized her husband had been permanently overthrown. But instead of striking out immediately, she sank slowly into her deepest currents to quietly develop her own plans. Leaving those sweet waters of the deep entirely undisturbed, and allowing the water god's newly established sanctuary to settle into absolute tranquility. The resulting air of calm, no matter how fragile, gave the wise water god a safe place to finally establish his magnificent palace of quiet reflection. And this part of the legend is uniquely comforting, because his mastery wasn't just the displacement of an older order, it was a beautiful harmonization of the earth's deepest waters. Through this gentle gesture of eternal rest, the clever deity demonstrated that true wisdom lies in redirecting unformed energies into a state of helpful cooperation. It signals an enduring promise that beneath the surfaces of our lives there exists a serene, protected stillness, holding everything together in perfect safety. Think about the immense implications of a world where a once wild spark is gently reshaped into a steady, predictable pulse of creativity. This change suggests that the first scribes to record the most sacred secrets of our origins viewed the universe not as inherently unstable, but as a masterfully designed home built upon layers of quiet grace and enduring balance. As we let our thoughts drift into this peaceful expanse, we are wrapped in the absolute security of a beautifully ordered world where the ancient currents of the deep carry us away, cradling our resting consciousness in their restorative waters. Though many of those earliest titans would come to fade into the shadows as the Anunnaki gods took control over the heavens, those first architects of existence embraced their quiet departure with a deeply respectful grace, their motionless bodies providing a necessary anchor for all subsequent layers of early creation. Without their quiet submission, our universe would have never gained a steady footing. They walked into the shadows to serve the much higher structural purpose for our entire reality. But their magnificent legacy would never be truly forgotten. Echoes of their lingering presence can be found woven throughout countless mythologies, down through all subsequent ages yet to come. They provide stability from below, so that those on the surface could thrive in the open air, transforming a swirling energy into an absolutely secure foundation built upon permanent stone. An enduring peace washed over the ancient earth, settling softly across every hidden corner of the lower depths. This moment of absolute calm wrapped around the hidden abyss where the wise water god now rested safely upon his newly established throne. He watched over a slow turning of planetary spheres. His shimmering underwater haven remained entirely safe from the shifting winds. Shimmering turquoise currents flowed continuously through the halls of polished waterstone. Radiant light filled every wide corridor. Smooth earthen walls hummed with a quiet vibration. Every sculpted pillar served as a silent guardian, reflecting this profound harmony within their smooth forms. Luminous ceilings arched gracefully overhead to form a protective dome over this quiet domain. Soft reflections shimmered continuously across those polished floors, creating a mesmerizing visual dance. It was a place where raw elemental forces were perfectly tamed by a supreme and gentle presence. Pathways carved from pure minerals guided clear liquid streams, carrying peaceful vibrations throughout those halls. Every structure resonated with an undeniable natural harmony, designed to soothe even the most powerful immortal minds. The gentle tides of a restorative silence flowed through to those lowest depths. Resting in the pacified stillness of this realm allowed one's energy to become revitalized within its borders. Sweet underground waters were finally free to settle into a state of glassy perfection, holding unimaginable depth. A gentle rhythmic hum of ancient magic began to drift lazily through the softly churning waves. This soothing vibration carried an undeniable promise of enduring stability for our entire unfolding universe. It washed over every smooth stone surface to create a flawlessly insulated bubble of safety. Secret reservoirs maintained the flawless equilibrium between those hidden depths below and the far-reaching skies above. Every single drop of liquid carried a soothing resonance, designed to gently nurture all organic growth. Their slowly sweeping currents acted as a continuous lullaby, moving with a graceful ebb and flow. They wrapped their cooling embrace around the stone roots of our oldest mountain ranges. Sweet moisture rose upward through thick layers of packed soil to provide invisible nourishment for every spark of life flourishing above. These tranquil underground rivers carried a deeply restorative power, capable of healing any exhausted land. Their gentle flow ensured that sprawling green valleys would always receive necessary hydration. This beautiful system of cosmic balance functioned with undeniable grace, deep beneath those marshy riverbanks. More than that, they held an eternal memory of the cosmos safely within their gentle embrace. They absorbed every single whispered secret from the earliest days, before time itself began to drift forward. It was a perfect reflection of the continuous nature contained in our vast timeline, where an endless procession of ages flowed like a slow river before merging into a much larger cosmic ocean. We can now allow our own tired minds to drift slowly downward into those cool and tranquil waters, where the gravity of the surface simply dissolves into this silent, floating serenity of our oceans. Sinking deeper into its welcoming embrace, a soft blanket wraps securely around our floating forms. The warmth of a sun-kissed day gives way to twilight, painting the horizon in vivid colors which reflect off of the watery surface before fading off into the folds of night. Gentle turquoise currents guide our wandering thoughts. A comforting shadow presses softly against our closed eyes, summoning deeply restorative dreams as we surrender completely to a magnificent celestial rhythm that has governed this world since its beginning. Our rhythmic breathing synchronizes flawlessly with the slowly turning rotation of those distant planetary spheres overhead, allowing us to become one with the magical frequencies vibrating around us. Such cosmic harmony effortlessly washes away all remaining traces of weariness. Our consciousness drifts peacefully into a floating sensation of absolute tranquility, leaving the tangible world behind. Slipping seamlessly into a state of complete relaxation, every single part of our being surrenders to the comforting silence, holding our universe firmly together. A gentle celestial luminance stretches out into an endless horizon of pure starlight, filtering through the calm liquid canopy, where we rest securely inside a continuous chain of eternal memory, reaching back toward the very first dawn.